Paradrama Tales. I was born out of betrayal, a mistake nobody wanted to admit. 17 years later, the man who once denied me now wants to tell me how to live. But if you weren't there when I needed a father, you don't get a say now. Before I was even born, the cracks were already running deep. My mom, Amelia, and Jessica had been friends for years. Close enough to be sisters, people said. They laughed together, shared their lives, trusted each other. But trust is fragile when betrayal sits quietly at the edges waiting for its moment. Jessica was married. Her husband, my biological father, was charming, friendly, the kind of man who everyone thought was solid, until he wasn't. The first betrayal came when he cheated on Jessica with Amelia, getting her pregnant. It could have ended everything right then, but Jessica somehow chose forgiveness. She stayed, she smoothed over the cracks. She convinced herself that people make mistakes, that love could be stronger than hurt. And then came the second betrayal, this time with my mom. It's almost surreal looking back. How did she find it in herself to forgive again? How did she stand in the same room with them? My mom and her husband, and pretend life could keep going. Maybe it was denial, maybe it was hope, maybe it was just pure, unimaginable strength. Whatever it was, Jessica forgave. She forgave her husband, Amelia, and somehow she forgave my mom too. When I was born, my mom insisted I was his child, but he denied it. Every time the topic came up, he shut it down. No, he said, not his, not possible. It didn't matter that people whispered about how much I resembled him as I grew up. It didn't matter that my features mirrored his so closely it was almost uncomfortable to look at us side by side. Daniel was easier, cleaner, less messy than admitting the truth. And so I grew up in the shadow of that denial. A child who wasn't acknowledged. A child who existed, but somehow didn't. Not fully, not publicly, not in any way that counted. Jessica stayed with him. Amelia raised her child. My mom raised me. And the web of betrayal wove itself tighter around all of us, binding us in a silence that none of us wanted to break. That was my origin story. Not a fairy tale, not even a tragedy exactly. Just a slow, steady unraveling of trust that began before I ever took my first breath. By the time I was old enough to understand the looks, the silences, the quiet bitterness between the adults in my life, I had already learned the unspoken rules: don't ask too many questions, don't expect too many answers, and never, ever expect anyone to own up to the truth. I was born into betrayal. I grew up inside it. But what nobody expected was that I wouldn't carry it quietly like they did. I wasn't going to spend my life pretending not to see what was right in front of me. And when the truth finally came crashing down years later, confirmed by DNA, undeniable even to him, I realized something else: that just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean they get to share your life. For most of my life, the question of my father hung over me like a quiet, bitter cloud. People had opinions, hushed ones, but no one ever told me anything for certain. Not my mom, not Jessica, and definitely not him. He denied it every time my name came up, every time someone pointed out the similarities. The way my nose tilted just like his, the way my eyes crinkled in the same shape when I smiled. He brushed it off like dust. Coincidence, fantasy, not his problem. And I learned after enough times not to bring it up. It was easier to live with a hollow answer than to keep reopening the wound. But a few months ago, something shifted. Maybe it was my age. 17, nearly an adult, no longer a child easy to dismiss. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was just the way time wears people down until they can't lie to themselves anymore. He looked at me one afternoon. Really looked, and I could see it happen. The recognition, the sinking realization, and for once, he didn't deny it. Instead, muttered something about getting answers and agreed to a DNA test. No fanfare, no apology, just logistics, swab, seal. Wait, those days waiting for the results were a strange kind of limbo. Part of me wanted it to be wrong, to cling to the faint hope that I wasn't tied by blood to the man who had treated my existence like an inconvenience. Part of me wanted it to be right, because at least then I wouldn't be crazy for seeing what everyone else pretended not to. When the results came back, there it was. 90.9% match, unavoidable, unrevocable. He was my father. He had been my father all along. There was no dramatic reunion, no hugs, no tears. Just a quiet, awkward acceptance between us. He started visiting about once a month after that. Short, strained conversations that felt more like two acquaintances being polite than a father and daughter reconnecting. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't warmth. It was weird. Heavy with everything unspoken between us. He didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to make up for 17 years of silence. How do you look someone in the eye who chose to pretend you didn't exist? Still, I tried to meet him halfway. I answered his questions about school. I let him sit with me and the kids at family gatherings, even though it made my skin crawl a little. I listened when he told stories about his life, stories I should have grown up hearing. But deep down, a wall had already been built inside me. A a quiet, solid thing that said, you can't just show up now and expect to erase everything that came before. DNA doesn't build relationships. Time does. Consistency does. Kindness does. And for 17 years, he had given me none of those things. The truth changed the facts. Yes, but it didn't change the foundation that had already been poured in silence and absence. He was my biological father. That was a fact now. But whether he would ever truly be my dad, that was something he hadn't earned. And maybe deep down he knew it too. When the DNA results came back, it was like a door cracked open. Not swung wide, not flung with joy, just a cautious, creaking opening into something neither of us knew how to walk through. He started visiting about once a month, always tentative, always awkward. I could tell he was trying in his own clumsy way, but every time he sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands, asking shallow questions about school or hobbies. It felt less like a reunion and more like an obligation. How do you catch up on 17 years in an hour? How do you talk about math tests and weekend plans with the man who missed your first steps, your first words, your first heartbreaks? We talked about surface things, safe things, sports, college plans, but we never touched the real stuff. The questions I never asked because I knew I wouldn't like the answers. Why didn't you fight for me? Why was I so easy to deny? How do you look at me now without drowning in guilt? Instead, we floated above the wreckage, pretending it wasn't there. I wanted to believe that maybe, somehow, we could build something real from the ruins. But every meeting was a reminder that relationships aren't built from matching DNA or polite conversations. They're built from being there. Day after day, year after year, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard. And he hadn't been there. Now he wanted to skip ahead. He wanted the perks of being a father without ever having done the work. He wanted authority without history, respect without relationship. Sometimes during our meetings, I would catch him looking at me with this strange expression. Part pride, part sadness, part something I couldn't name. Maybe he was mourning the years he couldn't get back. Maybe he was trying to pretend we could fast forward past the consequences. But you can't. You can't rewrite 17 years of absence with a few visits and some small talk. You can't graft a relationship onto soil you never bothered to tend. I tried. I really did. I showed up. I answered the texts when he sent them. I smiled through the awkward silences. But it always felt like sitting across from a stranger who knew the facts of my life, but not the shape of my heart. And in that growing space between us, something became very clear to me. Blood can open a door, but it can't make you walk through it. It can't build the bridge. That takes effort, real, sustained effort, and he had already missed too many chances to start. The more he came around, the more I realized that what I was looking for, the father I needed, the one I deserved, wasn't going to suddenly appear just because the truth was now official. He was who he was, and I was who I had become, strong, guarded, independent, because of all the years he wasn't there. We might share a last name now, at least on paper, but we didn't share a history, and we might never share a future. It happened on one of those awkward monthly visits. The kind that had started to feel more like obligatory check-ins than real bonding. We were sitting in the living room. He was on his phone, half distracted, scrolling through something, while I curled up on the couch with a book. It was just another quiet afternoon. Until it wasn't. The book I was reading was a romance novel. Nothing scandalous, nothing inappropriate. Just a story about two people falling in love, with all the messy, beautiful emotions that come with it. It was the kind of book I had been reading for years, the kind of story that made me feel seen and understood in ways real life rarely did. He noticed the cover, a soft focus image of a couple nearly kissing, and frowned. "What are you reading?" he asked. I showed him the cover without much thought. His face twisted almost immediately into disapproval. "You're too young for that," he said, his voice sharp in a way that caught me off guard. "You shouldn't be reading those kinds of books." I blinked, unsure how to respond. It wasn't like the book was explicit, and even if it had been, since when did he get to decide what I was or wasn't ready for? I shrugged, keeping my voice casual. "It's just a book. It's not appropriate," he insisted, setting his phone down like he was ready to dig in for a full argument. "You need to stop reading that stuff. It's not good for someone your age." I stared at him, feeling a slow, cold anger start to build. Not because of the book, but because of what this moment really represented. After 17 years of absence, after denying me, after refusing to claim me until a DNA test forced his hand. He thought he could sit there and parent me like he had earned the right. He thought he could suddenly insert himself into my life, not as a guest, but as an authority. It wasn't about the book. It was about control, about the way he wanted to fast forward past all the hard parts. The trust building, the apology, the work, and land directly in a position of power over me. But love doesn't work like that. Respect doesn't work like that. They're not automatic, they're earned. And he had earned nothing. I closed the book gently, marking my place. I looked him in the eye, feeling a clarity I hadn't realized I was capable of. I'm not going to stop reading, I said, my voice calm but firm. He looked surprised, like he thought I'd back down, that his disapproval would carry weight it hadn't earned. I'm your father, he said, his tone growing sharper. You have to listen to me. And that's when the words slipped out. Sharp, true, and burning with the weight of all the years he hadn't been there. No child support, no opinion. It hit him like a slap. I saw it, the way he flinched, the way the words cut deeper than any argument could have. For a second, he just stared at me, stunned into silence. And in that silence, I realized something important. I wasn't the little girl he thought he could parent. I was the young woman he had left behind. And she had learned how to stand on her own. This wasn't about rebellion. This wasn't about disrespect. This was about boundaries. This was about survival. This was about claiming the voice that had been silent for far too long. And if that hurt him, if hearing the truth stung, well, it was a fraction of the hurt I had carried all my life. The moment the words left my mouth. No child support, no opinion. The air between us changed. It was like I had fired a cannonball through the polite little wall we had been tiptoeing around for months. He sat there frozen, blinking at me like he wasn't quite sure what had just happened. I didn't take it back. I didn't soften it. I didn't apologize. Because why should I? Those 5 words weren't just about the money. They were about everything. The years of silence, the birthdays missed, the school plays with an empty seat in the back row, the milestones he never showed up for. He wanted the authority of a father without doing the work of being one. He wanted to jump into my life now, when it was convenient, when it fit neatly into his schedule, without acknowledging that he had opted out when it mattered most. And I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story just because he was uncomfortable hearing the truth. He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, but no words came out. Instead, he looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers as if trying to physically grasp a response. That's not fair, he finally muttered. I let out a breath, a short laugh without any real humor. Fair, I repeated. You think any of this has been fair? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of everything unsaid hung heavy between us, the years he denied me, the family events he skipped, the father-daughter dances I didn't attend because I had no father to bring. The nights I watched other kids run into their dad's arms, wondering if there was something wrong with me that made mine not want me. I didn't say all that, I didn't need to, because he knew. And for once, he couldn't hide behind excuses or distance or silence. He shook his head, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, and said, almost defensively, I'm here now, aren't I? I nodded slowly, keeping my voice steady. Yeah, you're here now, but you weren't there then. And you don't get to act like 17 years didn't happen. He didn't respond. What could he say? The thing is, I wasn't trying to punish him. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I wasn't even trying to push him away. But I needed him to understand something fundamental. Presence without responsibility isn't enough. DNA doesn't erase absence. And showing up late doesn't grant you the same rights as someone who never left. I wasn't some angry kid lashing out. I was a young woman who had built her own strength, her own life without him, and who had learned that protecting her heart wasn't just important, it was necessary. That day, as he sat there in awkward, wounded silence, I made a decision. I would be polite. I would be respectful. But I would not shrink. I would not hand over trust or authority just because biology said I was supposed to. He could be part of my life, but only if he earned it. Only if he understood that real relationships are built with love, respect, and time, not entitlement. And if he couldn't accept that, if he couldn't stand hearing the truth when it was finally spoken plainly, then maybe he didn't deserve even the little space I was offering him, because love isn't an obligation, it's a choice. And for the first time in my life, I was the one making the choices. When he finally left that day, the house felt too quiet. I sat there staring at the same page of my book, unable to focus, my mind spinning through everything that had just happened. The sharpness of what I had said. No child support, no opinion. Kept echoing in my head, not because I regretted it, but because I knew it had cut deeper than either of us expected. It wasn't just a clapback. It wasn't just about shutting down an argument. It was the first time I had said out loud what we both knew but neither dared to confront. He hadn't been there, and no amount of pretending could erase that fact. For him, my words must have felt like a door slamming shut. A reminder that biology alone didn't make him entitled to a seat at the table he had refused to set. And for me, it was something even heavier, because deep down beneath the anger and the defiance, there was still that small, wounded part of me that had once wanted a father. A real one. Someone to walk beside me in the hard moments, to show up not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Saying those words, standing up for myself, meant acknowledging that the father I needed never showed up, and he probably never would. It meant letting go of the fantasy I didn't even realize I had been holding on to. The hope that someday he would apologize, or make it up to me, or turn into the kind of parent I deserved. It meant accepting that what I had was a man who denied me until DA proved him wrong, who visited once a month out of obligation, and who thought that criticizing my choice of reading material could somehow replace years of silence. It wasn't just about the romance novel. It wasn't even about that one argument. It was about a lifetime of absence crashing into one small, stupid moment. And finally refusing to pretend it didn't matter. That's why it hurt. Because it was never just about the money he didn't pay, or the birthdays he missed, or the milestones he skipped. It was about being invisible to someone who should have seen me. It was about realizing that no matter how hard he tried now, some damage couldn't be undone. It wasn't about punishing him. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About saying out loud and without apology, you weren't there. You don't get to act like you were, and I am not obligated to hand you the parts of me you chose to ignore for 17 years. That hurt both of us in different ways. But maybe it was the kind of hurt that was necessary. The kind that clears the air, rips off the bandage, and forces both people to see the wound for what it really is. I didn't enjoy seeing him flinch. I didn't feel triumphant when he left, but I felt honest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally defended the girl he left behind. The girl who deserved so much better than to be an afterthought. And that honesty, even though it hurt, was the first real step toward healing. Not just healing the relationship, but healing myself. In the days that followed our argument, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the kind of anger that flares hot and wild. It had cooled into something quieter, something sharper clarity. I realized that for most of my life, I had been carrying around this invisible weight, the feeling that I owed him something. Gratitude maybe, deference. Some kind of automatic loyalty simply because we shared DNA. But after everything, after 17 years of absence, after a lifetime of silence, I finally understood biology doesn't create obligation. Presence does. Love does. And he had not earned either. I didn't owe him my trust. I didn't owe him my obedience. I didn't owe him the right to dictate how I lived my life, what books I read, or what choices I made. What I owed him, what I owe anyone, is basic respect, the kind one human being gives another. Nothing more, nothing less. Setting that boundary wasn't about punishing him. It wasn't about building a wall and shutting him out. It was about protecting myself. Because here's the truth no one tells you when you're a kid navigating broken family ties. You're allowed to decide who gets access to you. You're allowed to demand more than just presence. You can demand consistency, empathy, respect. And if someone can't offer those things, it's okay to limit their role in your life. It doesn't make you cruel. It doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you healthy. For so long, I had been afraid that standing up for myself would make me the bad guy. That saying, "You don't get a say," would somehow erase any chance of building a relationship with him. But I realized that a real relationship, a healthy, lasting one, isn't built by swallowing your hurt to make someone else comfortable. It's built on honesty, mutual care, and earned trust. And trust, once broken, isn't freely given back. It has to be rebuilt, brick by painful brick. So I decided that moving forward, I would set my terms. He could be part of my life, yes. He could visit, ask questions, be present. But he wouldn't get authority just because he finally showed up. He wouldn't get unconditional access to my heart without proving he deserved to hold it. And if he couldn't handle that, if he saw boundaries as rejection, that was his work to do, not mine. I wasn't going to sacrifice my peace for someone who hadn't been willing to sacrifice anything for me. It felt strange at first, like stepping into a new, unfamiliar version of myself, one who wasn't desperate for approval, one who wasn't willing to make herself small to fit someone else's idea of family. But it also felt right, because at the end of the day, family isn't about blood, it's about effort. It's about showing up not once, not twice, but again and again. Especially when it's hard, especially when it's messy. He didn't get to skip that work. He didn't get to bypass the hard conversations, the awkward rebuilding, the slow earning of trust. And I didn't have to apologize for expecting better. Not from him. Not from anyone. Setting those boundaries wasn't selfish. It was survival. It was respect. Not just for him, but for myself. And finally, it felt like enough. For a long time, I thought loyalty meant forgiveness without boundaries. I thought love, even broken, messy love, meant letting people back in no matter how many times they hurt you. But standing there, after everything with him, I realized something I wish I had learned earlier. You are allowed to protect your heart. You are allowed to say, this far and no further. It doesn't make you cold. It doesn't make you cruel. It makes you strong. When you grow up surrounded by complicated relationships, by betrayal, by silence, by abandonment, it's easy to believe that love has to hurt. That care has to be earned by swallowing your pride, your anger, your needs. But real love, real family, doesn't demand that you bleed for the privilege of being seen. Real love says, you matter, your hurt matters, your boundaries matter. And anyone who can't honor that love doesn't deserve to be inside the walls you've built to protect yourself. Choosing to set limits with him wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing him for the years he missed. It was about recognizing that some relationships aren't healthy, not because of one big betrayal, but because of a lifetime of small, cumulative absences. It was about choosing peace over the constant ache of unmet expectations. It was about understanding that protecting my heart doesn't mean closing it off forever. It means being careful about who I allow to carry it. I had spent so many years wondering what was wrong with me that he didn't want to be part of my life. But the truth is, it was never about me. It was about his choices, his failures, his unwillingness to be the kind of man, the kind of father that a child deserved. And realizing that was the most freeing thing I've ever experienced. Because it meant I could stop trying to fix something I didn't break. It meant I could stop waiting for him to become someone he never was. It meant I could choose myself and not feel guilty about it. Self-respect isn't loud. It doesn't scream or slam doors. It's quiet, steady, unshackable. It's the voice that says, I deserve kindness, I deserve consistency, I deserve better. It's the strength to walk away from anyone, even someone with your blood in their veins, if staying means losing pieces of yourself. And if he couldn't understand that, if he couldn't accept the terms of being in my life, respect, honesty, effort, then that loss would be his, not mine. Because I wasn't that desperate little girl anymore, aching for crumbs of attention. I was a young woman who knew her worth. And from now on, I would protect my heart, not out of fear, but out of love for myself. Because the truth is simple, you are allowed to demand more. You are allowed to expect better. You are allowed to protect your heart, no matter who asks you to lower your walls. Especially when they never showed up when you needed them most. At the end of it all, here's what I know for sure: love acquires more than biology. It requires presence, it requires effort, it requires showing up. Not when it's easy, not when guilt finally catches up to you, but day after day when nobody else is watching. Blood might connect people, but blood alone doesn't build trust. It doesn't heal the years spent wondering why you weren't good enough to stay for. And no matter how much someone wants to skip ahead, to pretend the past doesn't matter, it does. The past shapes us, it teaches us what we deserve, and what we no longer have to accept. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not bitter. I'm simply clear. If you want to be in my life, you have to earn your place. You have to bring kindness, not just a last name. You have to bring consistency, not excuses. Because I am not a consolation prize. I am not someone's afterthought. I am not something you acknowledge only when it becomes too uncomfortable not to. I deserve more, and so do you. If you are listening to this and you've ever felt like you had to beg for love, remember, you don't. Your value isn't measured by someone else's ability to see it. Your worth isn't tied to the ones who didn't stay. You are enough. You have always been enough. And you deserve a love that shows up every day without being asked. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever had to set painful boundaries to protect your heart, share your story in the comments. Let's build a space where we celebrate strength, honesty, and the courage it takes to choose ourselves. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw stories about healing, hope, and what it truly means to love and be loved. Because love, real love, is so much more than blood.